I can't go back to you, my friend. Don't even ask, don't play pretend.
Emerging onto the street from her house, Jessica couldn't believe that the most extraordinary events of her life would unfold on this day. Circumstances she would never have coped with under different conditions. Jessica hailed from an affluent family. Her father, an influential banker, ensured that she and her mother never faced financial woes. The most expensive belongings, finest restaurants, and cuisine were always part of her life. Since childhood, she had been a spoiled girl, and as she matured, her character only worsened. All that concerned her were expensive possessions and her friends from similarly affluent backgrounds. Gossip, boys, and entertainment were all that occupied the mind of 20-year-old Jessica. Approaching her Ferrari, she dialed Betty, her closest confidant, to whom she could entrust her most intimate secrets. Jessica never imagined that Betty would betray her trust. "Hello?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Jessica, forgive me, but I've fallen ill today and won't be able to accompany you shopping." "Ugh," Jessica muttered, disdainfully ending the call. Betty may have been her best friend, but even she wasn't allowed to treat her like that. "Ill!" Jessica scoffed. "And now I must go shopping alone because of her illness," she thought, settling into her car. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the window. She opened it to find a young man whose clothes were worn and whose odor was unpleasant. "Get away from the car, beggar!" she shouted, spraying perfume from her purse into his eyes. The young man recoiled, but a passing car lightly grazed him, sending him tumbling onto the road. Jessica had no intention of aiding the poor fellow. She pressed the accelerator and fled the scene. A few blocks later, she had already forgotten about the person she had injured, harboring no remorse. She dismissed thoughts of him as if he were a mere mosquito swatted away, insignificant. Jessica enjoyed her shopping spree, met up with her boyfriend, went to the movies, and had coffee. Her day was splendid and quite satisfied with herself. She headed home to a luxurious dinner. Her father was running for office, and she was immensely proud that he would soon hold power. What more could she want? Young, beautiful, wealthy, and now her father would be an authority. Life had been utterly successful. But as soon as she entered the house, the expression on her mother's face indicated something had happened. Before she could even remove her coat, her father's voice echoed through the house. "Jessica, where were you today?" His question surprised her. He never inquired about such matters. Interrogation was not customary in their home. But from his expression, she understood the matter was serious. "I was doing my usual routine on my day off, shopping, and then I met Jerry. We went to the movies and had coffee." "Dad, what happened?" "I can't understand," she said nervously. Without a word, her father switched on the television. There was a surveillance video showing the moment when she sprayed the young man's eyes and the subsequent accident. Seeing how the car hit the person made Jessica instinctively cover her eyes with her hand. "Explain what this is," her father demanded anxiously. "Do you realize that if this scandal erupts, my entire campaign will go up in smoke? I can already envision the headlines. Local heiress cruising in a Ferrari behaves recklessly. And to make matters worse, her banker father covers for her. What kind of candidates are we? My career will collapse overnight, do you understand?" her father yelled. "Thank your stars that I have friends in the police force who managed to obtain this footage," he continued more calmly. "Sweetheart, what's the matter then?" her mother intervened. "If we have the footage and there's nothing more to say, we should forget about it," she insisted. "We have the footage, but the victim, the one whose eyes Jessica sprayed and then hit with the car, knows who she is, and he wants to take legal action. My lawyers couldn't dissuade him, neither with bribes nor threats. Therefore, Jessica," her father turned to her, "tomorrow morning you will go to the hospital and apologize until he drops the lawsuit." Jessica snorted. "No way am I bowing down to that beggar." Who is he to make me apologize to him? You will go, her father shouted. I'm fed up with all of this. Otherwise, no more cars and no more money. Calm down, dear. Her mother tried to soothe her father. Lips trembling with indignation, Jessica stormed off to her room, feeling deeply offended by her father's lack of understanding. How could he not realize that by humbling herself before such insignificance, she was humiliating their entire family? But with these bitter thoughts, she fell asleep, comforted by the belief that her father would reconsider everything in the morning, and she wouldn't have to apologize. At 7 o'clock the next morning, her mother woke her up, an unusually early hour for Jessica, and Jessica realized that everything that happened yesterday was not a dreadful dream, but truth. Descending downstairs, she saw her father sitting at the table. He didn't greet her, but instead, he immediately asked if she had considered everything and how she would handle the matter. "Daddy," pleaded Jessica, "maybe it's unnecessary. You're smart. Find another way." "No," said her father firmly. "We've tried everything. No bribery, no blackmail, no threats work. I'll say it again. If this case blows up, it's the end of my career. Do you understand how much money has been spent on this and what serious people are expecting my victory? And you want to ruin it all with one foolish act? Have your meal and then leave. Nathan will drive you. There's no need to drive an expensive car to the social hospital." Jessica walked through the hospital corridor, her insides churning with fear of contracting something from these insignificant people. Entering a ward, she saw a guy lying on the bed with a bandaged head and a cast on his arm. He turned his head towards her and began to scrutinize her. There was nothing hostile in his gaze, only curiosity. "So, you didn't recognize me," thought Jessica. "Did you come to splash perfume in my other eye?" Smiling, he asked, "No perfume today?" "No," she replied, averting her gaze. "So, you recognized me?" "I came to check on your health and see if you need anything," she said. "No, you didn't come for that. Your father is running for elections, and you hope to bury the case, because his lawyers couldn't do anything about it. But I'll disappoint you too. I'll sue, and I'll ruin your father's career. It's not because I'm malicious. I'm just tired of injustice. My brother was killed. Some rich scumbag got drunk and shot him right on the street. He just didn't like the way my brother looked at him, and the case fell apart due to insufficient evidence. But I didn't kill anyone," exclaimed Jessica. Suddenly, she realized she hadn't even thought about him if it weren't for this situation, but she couldn't understand how to plead and persuade him. Something began to weigh on her, unsettling her soul. "What's your name?" she asked. "Brandon," he replied. "I'm Jessica. You know, I truly feel sorry for your brother, but you must understand. I'm not like his killer, and I had no malicious intent. I was just really scared." "I think you knew what you were doing," he retorted. "You called me a bum, and then spent 10 seconds searching in your purse for perfume to spray in my face. And you didn't care that you hit me with your car." Jessica stood there, head bowed, but surprisingly, she wasn't thinking about how she nearly killed someone. She pondered how to prevent him from going to court and exposing the case to the public. "Why did you look and smell like that?" she asked. "You look quite presentable now." She immediately noticed his rugged facial features and beautiful green eyes, simultaneously stern yet tender, revealing the pain of past hardships. He tried to sit up higher on the pillow but couldn't, letting out a small groan, which he stifled, and looked intently at her. "You know," he said, "not everyone ends up on the streets willingly. I lost my job because my boss suspected me of having an affair with his wife, and I got evicted because I couldn't pay the bills on time. And now, I've been wandering for 3 weeks looking for work and sleeping on the streets. But I guess you're not interested." "I'm very interested," said Jessica, though her expression didn't seem convincing. And from his face, she realized he knew she was lying. She fell silent, and so did he, each lost in their own thoughts. She thought about how to persuade him, while he harbored some plan in his mind that made him smile mischievously. "Listen," he said. "I won't blow this case up under one condition. You agree to spend at least a day in my shoes. You'll wear dirty clothes and see what it's like for an ordinary person who's lost everything to live on the streets. In this day and age." Jessica didn't immediately grasp what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked. "You want me to become a bum like—" She didn't finish her sentence. She wanted to say, "like you," but she refrained. "Yes, like me," he finished her sentence. "No, that will never happen," she exclaimed, her eyes flashing with indignation. Her outrage intrigued him. "Then go and tell your father he can pack his bags and find a way to pay off the debts, that his partners will hang on him." Brandon fell silent, looking at her, his smile sly. She smiled back at him with a smile filled with hatred. "I'd suffocate you with a pillow," she thought, glancing around as if to consider the idea. Yet she understood that her future life depended on this person now. "What do you want?" she rasped. "I've already told you," Brandon replied. "Dress up like a beggar and live on the streets. If you can do that, I won't tell anyone anything." "And how will I know you're not deceiving me?" Jessica asked. Brandon frowned. "You can think whatever you want, but don't dare insult. Unlike you rich folks, I keep my word." "But how will you know if I spent a day and night there if you're here?" "I'm being discharged tomorrow," Brandon said. "I don't have insurance, so no one will keep me just like that. We'll go together, and you'll experience what it's like." Jessica didn't want to agree, but she understood he wanted her to feel what he felt and thus seek revenge. "Fine," she said softly. "But where will I get clothes? I have nothing dirty or torn." "That's not a problem," Brandon said. "We'll borrow from my friend Emily. You'll give her your new expensive clothes, and she'll give you hers. Come here tomorrow at 10 in the morning, and we'll see." Returning home, Jessica refused to answer anyone. She ignored both her father and mother and simply went to her room. She locked herself in and took a bath, pouring in so many fragrances as if washing off everything that would happen to her tomorrow. She hated everyone around her: her father, mother, herself, and that repulsive Brandon, despite his very beautiful eyes. She wanted to call her friend Betty, but only now realized she couldn't share everything with her, and that Betty simply wouldn't understand. As agreed, Jessica arrived at the hospital at 10 in the morning. Brandon was already waiting for her. His head was no longer bandaged, only a cast remained on his arm. He sat in her car. "Where are we going?" she asked. "First, we'll go and buy me some good clothes. You're better at this," Brandon said. Jessica looked at him with an incomprehensible look, but drove to the most expensive clothing store because she simply didn't know any others. Brandon chose a beautiful suit and polished shoes for himself. He looked like a very handsome young man, catching the eyes of the girls walking around the store. Then they drove to the outskirts of the city, to the most run-down neighborhood. They found Brandon's friend Emily, and while Brandon stood by the car, the girls changed clothes. Jessica felt foolish and pathetic, hating everything about herself. Just yesterday she was happy, and today her whole life collapsed. It was unpleasant for her to put on someone else's clothes, and nausea rose in her throat, although it should be noted that Emily was a neat and quite slender girl. After changing, the girls got out of the car. Brandon smiled, complimented Emily, and said goodbye to her. "Get in the back seat," he said to Jessica. "I'll drive." Jessica blushed with anger, but didn't protest much, and silently sat in the back seat. "Now we'll go to a less dangerous neighborhood. I'll drive and keep an eye on you. That way we'll be even." "Why are you doing this?" Jessica asked. "Can't you just stop now?" "A deal is a deal," Brandon replied cheerfully. "I'm a fun guy, you know." He laughed. They arrived in a less dirty neighborhood and stopped at a traffic light. What happened next shocked Jessica. While they were waiting at the red light, two muscular guys with thick beards and tattoos approached their car. "Brandon, buddy, I see you dressed up and bought yourself a car," one of them said. "Look, Simon, what a cool dude," the other one chimed in. "And have you forgotten that you owe us 10 grand? Bill exhaled cigarette smoke into Brandon's face. "That's not true, Bill. It's not my fault your car got stolen." "I don't care," Bill replied and pointed the gun at Brandon's face. "Get out of the car, or I'll shoot you." Jessica sat in the back seat the whole time, dressed in old clothes, resembling a frightened kitten thrown into a storm on the street. She pressed herself against the car seat and made no sound. "Quick, get out of the car," Bill shouted, and took the safety off the gun. Brandon opened the door and was about to say something to Jessica, but he was roughly pushed away and dragged out of the car. The thugs jumped into the car and drove off sharply, disappearing around the corner. Jessica, still silent with fear, sat in the back seat, unnoticed by the thugs. "Look, Bill, who we have here." Simon noticed Jessica and leaned over the seat, trying to reach her. She bit his hand with all her strength. He struck her hard in the face, and she lost consciousness. Rising to his feet, Brandon stood bewildered in the middle of the road. His joke had gone too far. Now, his thoughts were solely consumed by Jessica and how he had let her down. He knew where they were headed, but the idea of getting there on foot, especially with everything aching, was beyond his comprehension. At that moment, someone parked a small motorcycle nearby and dashed into the shop across the street. Without considering the consequences, Brandon hopped onto the motorcycle and raced off to rescue Jessica from her predicament. Jessica regained consciousness on a filthy mattress, her hands bound tightly, her face throbbing with pain. Glancing around, she found herself in a warehouse surrounded by old barrels, reeking of gasoline. She was confined to some sort of storage closet. She heard the voices of the bandits, loud and boisterous as they argued and laughed. It was clear they were drunk, and their conversation filled her with dread. She realized they were deciding who would be the first to approach her. Desperation flooded her heart as she could think only of Brandon, understanding that only he could help her. Yet, fear gripped her even tighter. What if he didn't remember her, just as she had forgotten him not long ago? She had pushed him away like a nuisance, and it would be easier if he disappeared. As the door to her makeshift prison creaked open, revealing the looming figure of Bill, she involuntarily flinched, realizing what was about to happen. Meanwhile, on the other side of the warehouse, something crashed or exploded, the noise deafening. Bill sprang up, rushing towards his comrades' cries. Jessica strained to hear. The shouts grew fainter as the bandits fled into the distance. Suddenly, a hand covered her mouth, and she gasped, only to recognize the familiar voice whispering, "Shh, it's me." It was Brandon. He struggled to untie her, and without understanding why, she threw herself into his arms when finally freed. Gently, he pushed her away with his uninjured right hand, whispering, "We need to get out of here, or we won't make it. I know these thugs, and there's nothing good waiting for us." They entered the adjacent room, finding a small ventilation shaft. One by one, they squeezed through, and Brandon carefully shut the hatch behind them. The passage narrowed, leading them into a small utility room where they could situate themselves. "We'll have to wait here until it's dark. It's too risky to leave now," Brandon advised. They huddled together, the cold seeping into their bones. Occasionally, a rat scurried past, and Jessica suppressed her urge to scream. Every sound from outside was audible. The bandits raged, cursing Jessica and Brandon, threatening to kill them. Yet, strangely, Jessica felt no fear beside Brandon. She felt warm and safe, despite the rats now comfortably sharing their space. "Forgive me, Jessica. I never intended for things to turn out like this. It spiraled out of control, and now, I think we're even," Jessica replied quietly. They sat in silence for 7 hours until midnight approached. They emerged cautiously onto the street, walking along the river towards town. By the time they reached Jessica's home, dawn was breaking. She had forgotten she wore borrowed clothes, and Brandon was equally disheveled, his new attire now soiled and torn. They exchanged no words, only a sad smile and a handshake before Jessica turned and walked away. Brandon watched her depart before heading off himself. Upon returning home, Jessica realized her parents assumed she had stayed with a friend and hadn't worried about her. A month passed since the incident. Her car was returned, and the bandits were imprisoned for a long time. Yet, something within her had shifted. She knew she would never be the same again, unable to pinpoint exactly what had changed. Often, she would drift into thought, staring into space, and when her friends jostled her, she would smile and say everything was fine. Her father won the election, and life resumed its course, everything appearing as it had before. Yet she was different. One day, she and Becky were driving when they had a flat tire. Luckily, a service station was nearby. As they waited for the tire to be fixed, Jessica noticed Brandon standing beside her car, just as dirty as the day she had doused him with perfume and accidentally hit him with her car. "You're not homeless?" she asked in surprise. "Not anymore," he replied, a hint of optimism in his voice. "Why did you knock on my window then?" "Your trunk was open," Brandon said sheepishly. Jessica laughed and approached him, embracing him despite his dirty clothes. He returned the hug. "I missed you," she whispered softly, tears welling in her eyes. And Becky stood by, mouth agape, utterly bewildered.